Elden Ring PvP isn't exactly graceful. Just about every build in the game has access to some form of devastating damage, where even soft-capped Vigor cannot protect a target from certain annihilation. The sheer volume of projectiles and AoEs has made invading an obnoxious chore and ganking brain-dead easy, with skill often all but removed from the equation. But should that matter? Would PvP be substantially better if skill were the primary determiner? And what types of skills should a game prioritize? Before we can address Elden Ring, we should consider the evolution of Souls PvP. Way back in 2009, Demon Souls had PvP, and while the servers have since been taken offline, you can experience a slightly modernized version if you own a PS5 via the remake. Now, I don't have a lot of experience with Demon Souls PvP, as I did not have a PS3 when it first released, and didn't get around to playing it until around 2013, and only sporadically with online access. That said, Demon Souls PvP is weird. You lose levels when you die as a Black Phantom, the game's version of invaders. Body form plays a substantial role in your gameplay experience via health and world tendency, and the ability to make one-shot builds would make most Elden Ring players blush. It's easy enough to say that it's a deeply novel experience that has its charms, but leaves a lot to be desired. Skill was less about how you played, and more about how well you understood the system. Dark Souls introduced an expanded PvP experience through Covenants. While the basics of the system hadn't changed much, Covenants let players interact through more complex methods. They even added mechanics like poise to deepen the experience overall. Of course, none of that exactly balanced out when backstabs, or face stabs as they are lovingly referred to, were so potent that a Chaos Zweihander and a proper understanding of latency could easily clutch an insta-kill against an unsuspecting target. Really, the entire PvP system of Dark Souls was so dependent on latency that without considerable knowledge of the techs and mechanics at work, you couldn't really expect anything better than a very random fight. And while I think calling it a bad system is overly simplistic and not entirely accurate, I will say it's incredibly unintuitive. Also, it's sort of bad. Where in most action games you'd think hitting your opponent was an obvious and effective tactic, early Souls games said taking a swing at someone was more likely to get you killed than them. Dark Souls 2 continued the trend of being a high-latency experience, though it course-corrected for many of the issues in previous games. Backstabs fell out of favor and the riposte took its place. It retuned poise and tried to make rolling a less universal solution, but it still relied on subsystems more than front-end mechanics. Each entry tried something different to make the PvP work, and each had its own quirks to master, but none managed to deliver on an intuitive system. This is the trend that unified early Souls PvP. Obtuse mechanics where so much was happening under the hood, an unaware player was basically playing an entirely different game. When latency is your greatest weapon, skill is defined by your mastery of a subsystem rather than the immersive gameplay experience. It wasn't until Dark Souls 3 that Souls PvP really came into what I consider the realm of intuitive play. Latency was still absolutely an issue, but it didn't feel nearly as disjointed. When you hit someone with your sword, they either rolled it or got hit. There were exceptions, especially with higher ping connections, but it was a system that didn't ask players to know how it worked, just to play. And that's where I want to focus this video. Skill defines how well we play a game. It is one of the most universal metrics for players affecting the outcome of any given experience. The reason Dark Souls 3's PvP captured my interest so much was how well it retained immersion while playing skillfully. I felt like my actions had expected effects. While everything still needed to operate within a limited system, it never got so bad that I felt playing a medieval sword fighter was completely invalidated by my misunderstanding of latency. It let me play how I wanted to and make what I liked work. I didn't need to know about animation priority or dead angles or other weird tech just to be viable. There were still plenty of sub-mechanics working their flawed magic, and knowing how to manipulate them would help you to play optimally, but they weren't required. And it's that difference between optimal and viable that I find so necessary for good PvP. If the only way to win is by knowing every trick, then that's not a very good experience, especially when those tricks are not presented mechanics, but are instead exploits of flaws inherent in the system. Viability of standard or even casual play helps players acclimate to the finer complexities of a system, and it follows that the tighter or less flawed a system is, the more cohesive the experience. Dark Souls 3 did not master this balance, but it did manage to capture it in a way where it holds up today. Anyone can start up a character and R1 their way to occasional victory. The system was built to accommodate the basics while not stifling higher skill maneuvers. They just shortened the gap between floor and ceiling, which made for a more accommodating system overall. So it stands to reason that they would follow this trend with Elden Ring. But some, myself included, have suggested they may have gone too far. There is a difference between R1 spam and L2 spam. R1 spam can be regularly and routinely punished. It's a simple, easy-to-deploy tactic with a similarly easy counter. L2 spam, however, lacks such counterplay. Some ashes have easily exploitable backstab windows, some have obvious parries, but many have no intuitive way to punish them. The game becomes about avoiding each other's strongest attacks while looking for openings. It's basically the flow of most boss fights, except you take turns. And L2 spam is not the only offender. Spell spam is something many players, especially invaders, find extremely aggravating. Not because spells shouldn't be viable or optimal in whatever scenario, but because when you don't have to interact with mechanics like trading or spacing, a big laser that travels a considerable distance scales exponentially. In 1v1 scenarios, spells have their pros and cons. They represent a challenging playstyle that, with adequate skill, can give you an edge. In 2v1 or 3v1 scenarios, the problem becomes clear. If you're a solo caster against multiple opponents, you need to try a lot harder to make it work. Your openings are few and far between, and outside of the incredibly high damage you can deal, you're a lot more vulnerable than if you just played a high poise run poker with a pocket AoE. It's not a great situation, but it's where the power of spells is at its least offensive. In the reverse, if you're a caster with allies, suddenly everything falls apart. You can spam as much as you'd like, and there's painfully little they can do about it. After all, they have to worry about not just your allies, but your constant barrage of high damage at long range. With regard to both Ashes of War and spells, skill can fall away entirely. Casual play suddenly becomes indistinguishable from advanced play, and the gap between floor and ceiling all but vanishes. I've talked before about the role of skill in PvP, as well as how I appreciate the lower barrier to entry of Elden Ring with its powerful and simple mechanics. But how much is too much? How far is too far? Would we be better off going back to something like Demon Souls or Dark Souls 1, where only those with the know-how could actually compete? Some people hold Dark Souls 2 as the pinnacle of Souls PvP. The counterplay of the game is nuanced and fun when you get into it, though it does lack some of the more intuitive elements. Also, soul memory is bad for builds. Even Bloodborne has its champions. I love the way Bloodborne PvP feels, though it could stand to be tightened up considerably. I like the idea of blood gems, but Chalice dungeon farming is a bad way to gate access. But all of those older titles are fun because they let you get too strong and do weird things, not because they successfully immerse you in the intended experience. Elden Ring lets you get too strong, but through the intended play. It's a weird distinction, but it very much exists. It centers the conversation around it being a no-skill game, and conventional wins become bullshit because the game is bullshit. When it's so simple to win that anyone can beat anyone else with the press of a button, the game tilts so far toward the casual audience that it loses all appeal for veteran players. My preference is for the balance struck in Dark Souls 3, but there were plenty of things I would have liked to see adjusted or outright removed, many of which were carried into Elden Ring. Personally, I've never cared for hard swaps despite understanding their importance. I've never liked the idea that you have infinite equipment at your disposal because the game makes slots and weight thresholds a primary function of character building. Being able to ignore those designs with some well-timed inputs feels cheesy to me. It's high-skill play, absolutely, and in Elden Ring it feels more and more necessary to counter the plethora of obstacles you'll face while invading, but I really can't get past the idea that it feels unintentional and breaks my character immersion. I really like the idea that I need to choose what to bring with me, and I must make do with what I brought. Where that limitation exists is game-dependent, though immersive play suggests to me that it's whatever my character has equipped. I've never seen an NPC hard swap their setup to punish me for playing too passively, although that would be funny. To be clear, I don't think there's anything wrong with doing these sorts of exploits. I don't think it's bad to get sweaty or to become so intimately familiar with a game that you love it more than you love yourself. I get it. My issue stems from the ways in which counterplay is accounted for in game design. If the counter to spam is to parry, that's fair. Parrying takes skill to pull off consistently, and it's an easily interpreted mechanic. But if the expected counter to fighting multiple opponents is to always have carry and retaliation on a shield, always have Bloodhound Step on a dagger for getaways, and always have your talisman's hard swap ready for any number of situations, that's a lot less intuitive and a lot less fun for me. And I don't want to paint that sort of play as necessary. You can still play Elden Ring without doing those things and be viable. I do it all the time. But I find that the game has gone too far with invalidating intuitive skill. Spacing is an important mechanic, but not when you're getting bombed from a distance. Parrying is extremely useful, except when the risk to reward ratio is off balance and you'd be better off doing jumping heavies. Skill is playing its role, but that role is diminished in what is quite possibly an overcorrection from the days of pure system exploits and latency rules all warfare. Really, all I want is an immersive, deep experience where the system makes sense up front and more sense as you dig. I want intuitive play that makes me feel like the build I'm playing. I respect that Elden Ring has given credence to a casual audience without completely destroying what makes the series so worthwhile. I also understand that the changes they made came at a cost. It's not lost on me that the vast majority of new players to the series and I have very little in common, especially regarding what we like about games. I hate the open world exploration, and it's a lot of people's favorite part. I love invading, and they'd sooner see me killed in Minecraft than engage with the mechanic. There is a division of players, and FromSoft is trying their best to toe that line, and that worries me. The future of the series is undecided, and with so many people wanting different things, who's to say what'll take priority? I'd love to see future games scale back the power of characters and embrace the low fantasy elements. I want more intricate, grounded fights that put emphasis on the fundamentals and do their best to remove exploits where possible. I don't mind the big attacks, but there's a limit for what I find appealing. Ascending into the sky to become a dragon laser or launch a moon at your opponent is just too silly for me to want to engage with on a regular basis. It's spectacle over substance, and it affects how the game plays. I don't mind that there's game-specific ways to optimize my movements, but I hate the idea that I'm playing suboptimally because I didn't bring a bottomless arsenal of setups. And on the opposite end, I'm sure there are players who want the series to lean more into power creep. They want more anime, and more explosions, and more everything. The game should take 600 hours to complete, and the whole time you're driving a Mad Max supercar with 30 people all firing rockets with infinite ammo. Also, there's no PvP because that's disruptive. The real takeaway for me is that games can't appeal to everyone, and that's a lesson I wouldn't have thought FromSoft needed to learn. By prioritizing casual play, the game becomes harder to engage with long term. If winning doesn't require skill, what's the point in getting good? Skill can't be everything either. If only the best players can ever win, then everyone less dedicated is doomed to lose and the community will go hollow. And it's not wise to try to give everyone everything they want. Dark Souls was recognized for being uncompromising in its design. What does it become when that stops being the case? In summation, there is a middle ground between a game being all exploits and all spam. Skill should always matter, but it need not be the only factor. A good game lets skill define how it's played. A great game accommodates players of every skill level. Elden Ring is farther from that design than I'd like, and I can only hope the future holds a better balance than what we have. That's all for this one. A new patch just dropped and it has some nice PvP adjustments, though nothing to the tune of a 6-player limit or any other saving grace. Nerfing Radahn is an understandable change that I'm sure I'll appreciate when my level 10 finally gets there. Otherwise, let me know how you feel about the skill issue with Elden Ring and whether or not you like how prominent spam has become. Or we can talk about old techs and why you miss being able to insta-kill unsuspecting noobs. I love this series, flaws and all, and I appreciate that it continues to grow, even if it's not always in the direction I'd prefer. Until next time, thank you for watching.